Actually, at school, I never was interested in art. For me, like an art period used to be like it's a free period. I kind of felt like this is my calling. So, what's the visual brand of Flipkart? What's the visual brand of Swiggy? What now sets you apart is also, apart from being functional, is like a good story that you tell, a good, delightful user experience that you give. So, I see a lot of startups using stock illustrations. I sometimes look back at my work, which was like 2014, and it's absolutely bad.
One piece of advice that you would probably give your younger self?
uh,
Hey everyone, welcome to Product Stories, the podcast that delves into the minds of product and design folks to talk about their stories, challenges, and work. My name is Kaushik, and in each episode, I talk to my guests about how they work, the process they follow, new tools, and the breakthroughs they have had in their career.
This week, our guest is Shivam. He's a Senior Product Illustrator at Swiggy and he previously worked at Flipkart. We take a deep dive into Shivam's journey of discovering illustrations and getting started with it. We also talk about the role of illustrations in a product and at the same time, how do you collaborate with different team members. And at the same time, we talk about his advices for illustrators who are getting started. This was an amazing episode. I had a very fun conversation with Shivam, and at the same time, I learned a lot about product illustrations in general. So, make a cup of coffee or tea and sit back and enjoy this episode. Hey Shivam, it's a pleasure to have you here. I've been following your work for a really, really long time, and I'm so glad you're here. I've been waiting to have you on Product Stories for quite some time. I'm just glad you're here, man. I'm super curious to learn about your journey, how you got started with illustrations, and it's also nice to put a face to the person who creates all the amazing designs at Swiggy. Yeah.
mhm. Thanks, Kaushik. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Shivam Thapliyal. I work as a senior product illustrator for Swiggy. I have been into product illustrations for 4 years now. 2 years I did for Flipkart, and 2 years now I have been with Swiggy. So I was actually an engineer before. Like after my computer science graduation, I did like a backend developer job for 6 months, and then I made a switch to Flipkart where I joined as an intern, and then I converted to full time after a few months. So yeah, that has been how I got started into product illustration.
Interesting, man. I know you kept it very brief, for the huge journey that you have had, but what is it that kind of made you realize like illustrations is probably what I want to do? Does it have to do something with you've probably created art or something like that? What is that story behind the scenes story which kind of connects the dots to who you are today?
Actually, at school, I never was interested in art. For me, like an art period used to be like it's a free period, so to speak. So actually, it was when I went to college, I started illustrating, and I had learned Photoshop quite early. Like when I was in school, I got a new computer, and that's how I learned it. And I knew Photoshop, and I went into college. So you sort of join new committees and clubs, and I was a part of it. So that kind of gave me a good exposure in terms of practicing those skills, putting them to use. And then by fourth year, I was already like doing a bit of freelance work, getting featured in a lot of places, and then I kind of felt like this is my calling. It's not that I hate coding, I still do it as like creative coding, but I just felt like after when I went to engineering job, I just felt like I had more to contribute in field of illustrations. um, Else I would have felt like one more engineer outside in the industry. So I felt like I did more to justice to the title of a product illustrator. And by that time I had understood quite a lot, I had practiced a lot. That takes almost like a couple of years to just get to a point where you're really good at your craft. So at that time I was getting started, now that looking back, but I was still doing like decent work. So I felt like I want to pursue that, and that's what I did.
Interesting. So, I mean, when it comes to illustrations, right, there are like various types of illustrations, and the one you kind of expertise at is product illustrations, right?
Hmm.
Um, so what is kind of like the role that illustration plays in like product, in like the product design aspect? At the
Hmm.
same time, like when it comes to design, it's kind of tricky on how to get like your stakeholders see value in something. So
Hmm. Hmm.
how do you kind of like convince your stakeholders to like invest in design, invest in like the illustration aspects, or it can be like hiring a illustrator or something on those lines. But yeah, so kind of like how do you illustrate I mean, like, how do you convey the importance of illustrations and product, at the same time convey the same importance to like stakeholders at company who usually are the decision makers?
Okay. So I think it's very important when you think of a product, you just don't think of just the UI or just the flow. There's more to it, and that is product illustrations. Now, product illustrations have two purpose. One is very functionally driven. For example, within product illustration, there's iconography, which is sometimes very functional. That in terms of navigation, you need them for user to go around. Then there are, like, let's say, empty states. They're very functional in some way, where they're just telling you that you're not connected to internet, or your cart is empty. Now after that, it comes to a point where it sort of evolves from just being functional to also being a delight maker, where you have the brand kick in. So what's the visual brand of Flipkart? What's the visual brand of Swiggy? So right now, Swiggy, we are doing a bit of 3D. So that's what defines 3D at the Swiggy at the moment. So then it goes and evolves to storytelling. So overall, it stitches the entire user experience together, and it kind of is very tightly coupled to product design. So you really have to not just think about it as just an illustration which will be placed in this placeholder while designing. You have to kind of understand what kind of visual is going to be there. Is it functional? Is it a storytelling? And that's kind of sets the mood and expectations for the users. Sometimes it has a very direct application of, like, let's say, navigation, where you have bottom bar icons and you say, oh, these are functional. At that point, um, it's the primary purpose. But now, as there are many apps and everybody is like chasing towards a good user experience, what now sets you apart is also, apart from being functional, is like a good story that you tell, a good delightful user experience that you give. So that's what product illustrations help in terms of evangelizing the value. I think I have been fortunate in that sense, that wherever I have gone till now, like Flipkart and Swiggy, uh, the designers themselves are uh, very open and very passionate about making a user experience that is not just functional but delightful as well. But there are occurrences where I won't say it is ignored or not looked at, but it's been treated as P2, or let's say it has been said that, okay, we'll have a look at this later, or it's not in the priority list. And in that case, I usually have like anecdotes, or I usually have like insights from research that have happened, or the feedbacks I may have gotten, or some of the insight that I may have found, and I then kind of refer that to the stakeholders, in which case, like, I try to convince them that this is important. So that had been my way around it.
So, kind of like following up on what you said, right? Which was like there are like two approaches to illustration. One which is being functional, and
Hmm.
one which is being delightful. And
Hmm.
something which I've observed, and like something which is very visible in Swiggy as a product is like the illustrations are kind of made to like delight users, right? So,
Hmm.
uh, what is like the process that you follow at Swiggy to do this, to achieve this? how do you uh, navigate around things to ensure this is actually delightful for a user, and
Hmm.
it's not just pure, it's not just about being functional.
Hmm. Hmm. Got it. So at the moment, we are like a team of four um visual designers or product illustrators, and everybody follows a bit different process. But overall, like, the way it starts is you get a brief. Usually, it's either by designers, those who have a requirement of product illustrations, or it is usually by key stakeholders that, hey, uh, let's say this is coming up, we need to do something around it. So for example, last year we did Swiggy New Year's quiz, which was how you would Swiggy it. So it was more like an open brief. So initially it starts with what do we want to do. Sometimes we have the answer where it's like I need an illustration here, illustration there, and sometimes it's just like can we do something around New Year. So it kind of briefs is very different. So we kind of get together on a call, and try to firstly just talk about it. I personally like to have two approach. Firstly, I'll take a very objective approach. I'd say how many illustrations. Give me a list and put every screen in just one place. So that gives me idea of how much work and is there, and how much bandwidth I need to have in order to accommodate those requests. Once that is also figured out, I get more context around asking what is the product, how is it, and 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 uh, and then figuring out from there like how do we go around it. So usually I personally like to, once I have enough information to get started with, I kind of sketch a few ideas which is like quick thumbnails around that, and put it on like a mock frame, and then walk the product designers or product managers or key stakeholders depending on who all are involved. And once we have like an alignment of the direction, then I'll sort of start with vectors. Now this is very ideal process, so to speak, but sometimes there are like very quick deadlines, or let's say if something is going to roll out by tomorrow afternoon. So in that case, usually I would firstly go in my library, see if there's something that already exists, or ask designers to just explore our library and see if something vibes. And in that case, usually they'll have an idea that, oh, I need something like this, and this is there already in library. So I would just make enough tweaks or adjustments around that, and that kind of saves the day. So it's very different for different projects, but overall it's kind of gathering the context as much as you can, and then starting with sketches, and finally going to either 2D or 3D or whatever medium you choose. Sorry.
Interesting. So, kind of on the lines of working with a team and everything, right? Like I know you mentioned about stakeholders and everything. Um, so one question which I kind of had is when you are creating an illustration, say, um, or a set of illustrations,
Hmm.
who is usually the decision makers, who are all kind of involved in the creative process, right?
Mhm.
Is it just your team, the team of illustrators, or is it the person working on the product side as well as someone else? Yeah. So that was kind of the question, which I purely had kind of out of curiosity.
So there's no like one person who is the key decision maker. It's like entire uh, entire group that is involved. So usually not all product illustrators are involved in all the products. It sometimes usually one, and if it's a bigger project, then there are multiple product visual designers and illustrators involved. Usually the group is of a product illustrator, product designer, and product manager. And then you have other stakeholders coming in and coming out in terms of having a look, giving a sign off, or giving a feedback. So these are like three people. Those are kind of involved closely, because one is the key owner of the product, the other one is making the designs, and then you are kind of helping in terms of visuals and delight. So these three are there for sure. In terms of decision making, it's quite honestly a very collaborative process where you have to kind of take in the feedback that actually makes sense, and at the same time push others when when we are taking like creative liberty for granted in terms of doing something which just doesn't work. So it's usually like back and forth quite a lot. But from my experience, like these three are the key stakeholders that I see. Otherwise, like design managers or design leads or UX director, they also kind of step in just to have a look slightly when the project is about to go live, or at least just to see the overall experience rather than getting to an individual image, so to speak. So overall, so at the end of the day or the end of the project, we usually see the overall experience rather than looking at just one part of it, and then see if that makes sense or not. And if it doesn't, then we have to go back to the drawing board.
Interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of like the whole analogy of like looking at it from like the entire flow rather than just picking out individual illustrations. I think
Yeah.
that's like a that's something I kind of did not think about. Um, yeah, continuing on the same lines, right? Like I know Swiggy at the moment is like a fairly huge team, a fairly huge company as well. Um,
Yeah.
but let's say like a smaller company today probably might not be prioritizing illustrations or probably not even like visuals altogether. um,
Hmm.
at what scale do you think companies or like organizations should start taking this more seriously to add more depth to their work and the
Hmm.
experience of the user, at the
Hmm.
same time creating an identity for themselves as a brand or as an organization, right?
Hmm. That's a very good question because I see a lot of as an illustrator, obviously I'll be able to like tell that this illustration is from there. So I see a lot of startups using stock illustrations, and I think it's good, and I think there's no problem to it. But at the same time, you really need to understand when you want to switch, because if I take illustration out of your product and see it in silo, I just would not be able to tell if if that illustration is from your product. And that is one of the issues, one of the many issues actually. Sometimes like the illustrations are used where the hand is pointing in different direction, but there's no context to it. Like in sign up, it doesn't make sense, or it's sometimes pointing to a particular direction and there's nothing in that direction, so I don't know where to look at. So it's very important when to switch. Unfortunately, there's no objective answer that or a metric that can say, okay, now it's time to switch. It's usually when you're sort of starting to evolve, and as you're becoming bigger, it's always a better idea to sort of have an in-house product illustrator to kind of work on a library of sort, and to have your brand style defined, rather than very much later trying to figure it out. Or at least if you can afford it, start have a brand or a visual style set, and then kind of get freelancers to follow that. But it's very important to have the direction, um, that direction of thought that you have for your brand to be clear. So if it's not there, then you would end up using every resource you can find for free on the internet, and eventually uh, it might work honestly, but in most of the cases it doesn't, because a lot of stock illustrations are sometimes very much generic and to fit a lot of use cases. And that might be good for somebody who's just starting, but after some time you need to understand that it has to be replaced with your own visual style, not just aesthetic but functionally as well.
Yeah. So kind of something on which you mentioned, I kind of want to follow up on that, which is like,
Yeah.
if you have like, your brand and visual guidelines set, you should probably like, go about like creating like a library of sort. Um,
Hmm.
how do you kind of approach this? Like, because like this is like like I have like zero idea about how someone would approach this. So I'm really curious to understand, like, how you would go about doing this.
So it's a very long exercise, honestly. Like that takes months, but overall the idea is like the very basic one is icons on it. So you can very well start icons whenever you feel like, and that is what I usually look for. That okay, is the icon sorted, and then you can move to spot illustrations or other bigger illustrations. But overall the idea is to kind of document everything that you have been using in a very standard rules, and that is like what is a system library going to be, and you have to be accommodative of all the sizes and future use cases that you can at least foresee at this point. And that essentially means figuring out through Figma like what are the sizes you are using, how can you standardize them, and once you have that, then you start to take all the assets together and organize them, kind of merge them, because there are a lot of overlap. Somebody is using two different styles of arrows in two different places, so you kind of merge them together. So it's not like a one person job, it's more like a very collaborative job, because every designer is working in their own pod or in their product, and they're so much into the context that they wouldn't know that what the other person might be working on and how it might be different. So your job as a product illustrator, or specifically if you want to make systems, to understand that and then kind of work from there and collaboratively come together with other folks and say that we need to do something like this. And once you have that, then you kind of move on illustrations, which is a bigger project or a bigger task in itself, where you, or at least this is what I do, I would initially take a couple of screens together where the usage is there, so it is different. For example, I might take a order placed, because that is usually what I have been working on in Flipkart and Swiggy. So some use cases are there for sure. So order placed, or empty cart, or empty states is very common, and I think every digital product has that. So empty states, and then putting illustration to it and kind of exploring the idea of what could be there. Now from there you start to work with like key stakeholders, and that you kind of define, and once you have the clarity, then you start to make it for other places and kind of scale it up for different various use cases. And now that you have a compass which is like one style and one direction that everybody has agreed upon, you kind of take that and adapt to other places by like reusing components, reusing colors, and when I say components, I mean like elements like confetti, style of shapes, quality of shapes. So that is like a part of it, and then you kind of standardize again the sizes and the library, and kind of reusing these elements once you have created. So it's a fairly long process, and quite expensive in terms of time specifically. And yeah, it's more like you have to do it in order to like get an idea about it.
Interesting. I mean, this is like a problem that I have at where I work, which is to know,
Hmm.
where we are kind of like struggling with, like, having like different iconography in few places and stuff like that. So that's why I was like very curious to understand, like, kind of like how would you even go about starting with like a project that sounds, I mean, that just sounds so intense and huge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like very, very curious to understand this. um, yeah, I think you really did answer this very well. Um, but at the same time,
Yeah.
like, continuing more on your journey and like, what you do, actually kind of would really like it if you would probably talk about one or two of your favorite projects. I'm sure you've worked on quite a lot of projects, but which one probably is your like favorite, and like, why, and how you went about, working on the entire project.
So my favorite one is the avatars that I did for Flipkart. Like it was one of the projects after which I felt that I have learned quite a lot, but at the same time I felt like, oh, it's the start of the thing. So I had a very enlightening uh, experience, so to speak, because when we were creating the avatars, the initial idea that was coming around from everyone was like, oh, we can make something like what GitHub does, or something which is very like Marvel or super character style. But then I had to think about it, and I understood that a lot of people don't understand these characters, especially when your product, which was Flipkart, is delivering to tier 2 tier 3 cities. So they wouldn't understand what Superman is, they wouldn't understand character. From there onwards started the journey of figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And I started taking insights from research at that time. So they had a lot of insights around visual design. It was not specifically in just one study, as in there is a study done on visual design, but more like they went for a study and there was a insight around visual design. So I started asking them that if you have an insight ever, just let me know. And I started collating some of those insights. From there onwards, I started to figure out, okay, this colorful illustrations work. They really vibe with them. And at the time, we were also getting feedback like why they use Flipkart. So understanding from that, okay, that they like nice visual elements and things like that, I started to work backwards toward them, and then I did work on avatars. So from there were several other insights, like understanding of hand gestures is something that really works well. So we started using in other places. So I think even if you see today, so for wish list, the illustration is like somebody's holding a heart and it's putting on the product. So it's like that, what makes it human. So these are like some of the insight that I gotten from that project that I still use today, and that also given me like a direction to think in and probably understand more about the users. So that is one of the best projects that I've ever worked on. The second one that I worked on was Instamart when I joined Swiggy. It was my first project. After that, I've done several other projects, but that was my favorite because I was collaborating with my friend Snehal. So she was my manager, and this was the first project I had done with him and my manager was Prasanna and art design director Srinath. So it was like crazy, but it was so much fun because like there was back and forth, and I was just joined, and it was a new way of collaboration that I was doing, coming from the other team or another company. So in that, I really understood like branding, uh, and how do you like design a product from scratch that is so visually heavy. By this time I had till this time I had done product were very UX heavy in terms of flows and charts and UI. But when I joined Swiggy, I felt like the visual experience was further elevated, so to speak. So figuring that out, that how do you strike a balance, was absolutely amazing. And this was the first project I was doing 3D in. I had done 3D, but I was just doing it for fun previously, not for like app or for office. But this was the first time I had to like do 3D visuals with taking several feedback, and it was just hectic and amazing at the same time.
So you were like, talking about like, involving research in like, the visual design aspects and everything that you kind of worked on Flipkart. I think that's something I'm coming across kind of for the first time, and it's very interesting, like how research can kind of play a role in the visuals and like in illustrations especially. And at the same time, like I'm a regular user of Instamart. I started using it from the day it launched. I mean, like the visuals that you have created are like truly amazing, and they blend so well in the product, right? I think that's amazing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Yeah. So continuing kind of like, talking more about like the learnings that you have had from your experience and everything. Um, if someone was kind of like getting started with illustration today and wanted to become an illustrator, um,
Hmm.
what are like, some of the advices that you would share? And if it was like, kind of up to you to like, redo your journey or like, go about your journey again, how would you do it differently?
Uh, I think I won't do it like majorly differently, honestly, because I think I did in the right direction. Uh, but I would definitely like, for anybody who's want to get started, I would definitely say, firstly, be like prepared that it's going to take quite some time for you to get there, in terms of like uh, getting to a point where your work is nice. So I still remember, like, I sometimes look back at my work, which was like 2014, and it's absolutely bad. Like, it's just so bad, like, on a very objective level. But I feel like today, if somebody gets started, they are, and I usually get reached out to saying that I want to get started, how do I do it? So if I give somebody, they'll do it for like a week, and then they just vanish. So the very first thing, you need to be mentally prepared, in terms of saying that it will take time for you to see progress, because this is not something that you can understand mentally. It's also about like the hard skill that you have to understand, and an eye for good design, right? So that is first. And the secondly, I think, like, the very basic you should start from is just like a digital sketchbook, which is like, you don't make something with a very strong intent, you're just playing around with shapes. I'm not even going to talk about learn the tool, because your actual design will start when you are done with the tool. A lot of people get to a point where they're like, oh, I want to learn this tool in order to become designer. So don't treat learning the tool as a goal, but think of it as the start. So once you have done that, I think the very basic thing you can get started is with iconography. I mean, that's what I had started with, where just making like small icon sets of, let's say, 12 icons, and I would post them on Instagram. And I haven't deleted them. I was just having a discussion with somebody one day, and they were like, don't delete it, because that gives you an idea of like the progress that you have made. And it's actually very true. So I used to make one small illustration every day, or icon, and then put it out. And then later, slowly, I kind of understood like how to go about it, and then I started adding more details to my illustration. And that is when I got to a point where I felt like I have understood the tool, and I've understood the design part of it. And then, of course, I applied for design role in a lot of places, and initially in Delhi, in a few companies I got a call, and then I went, and it didn't happen. So I kind of realized that, okay, there's something not clicking, and then I took the feedback, kind of worked on that. And that's a very gradual process, and it's quite lengthy, but you have to just keep practicing. So I have been like making digital sketchbook, which is like Illustrator file, and you keep on adding artboards to it. And I would just scribble something during break, or scribble at night, or just make small illustration out of it. And if sometimes it's really good, I just make a series out of it. So that's like how I would approach.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you kind of like emphasized on being patient, because
Hmm.
me as a person, I'm extremely impatient, and I've quite a lot of times tried to learn illustrations, and you know, yeah, like before I get started, I kind of give up, because like just kind of how impatient I am with like learning it, and it you actually gradually improve with time, right? Um, which is, I think, something very very important to understand when you're getting started. Um, I kind of know that happened to me with product design, but I kind of like never felt it. Um, but yeah, with every time I try to illustrate, I realize like how much I need to be patient and learn it slowly.
Yeah, yeah. Because a lot of people even today are like, oh, I like illustrations and I want to get started. And I'm like, why haven't you started yet? Because I don't know where to start. So or my illustrations are bad. So I mean, that would always be the case. So you have to kind of deal with it patiently. And a lot of people at this moment, I feel, want everything to happen instantly, in terms of like learning something, or going to a going to a place that they want to be. So like, if it takes more than a week or 2 3 months, they tend to shift to something else, which is far quicker in some way, so to speak. That includes product design as well. Right now, like, the UX design is a very hot market at the moment. So they'll just do a course, and that's great. But like visual design is something that you can't just learn in 3 months. At least that's what I have experienced. So yeah, it's a lot of mental patience that you really need to have, even if you want to get into this industry.
Yeah, and I kind of like, reiterate on this quite a lot of times when like people ask me um, with respect to like, how do you get better at designs, or like, what is that one course or like one thing that I need to do to like, get better. I think
Hmm.
something which I've realized after quite some time is like practice is literally the only thing that kind of helps you
Hmm.
um, get better. Um, I mean, like when you're kind of doing it gradually, day by day, you kind of don't realize it, but
Hmm.
all that practice kind of adds up to like to the end goal, right?
Hmm.
I think that's something very important, and very important to understand and be patient with when you're working on visual design, especially.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And you also need to kind of, not initially, but after a point, surround yourself with people that you look up to and that are really good at it. So in my case, I had like my mentors, like Aisha Rana. So she was a product illustrator with Flipkart. By the time I joined, she left. And then later, Snehal, when I joined Swiggy, now she's not with Swiggy. But like such people, and outside of course work as well, like on Instagram that you follow, and if you get a chance to interact with them, like that also really helped in terms of like they, when they share something with you, or when they give you a very strong feedback, or a very honest feedback, that is really which kind of sets your compass aligned, um, and always a course correction, so to speak. So that's really very helpful when you realize, oh, I have been doing it wrong. So sometimes it's not just like aesthetically in terms of you making good illustration, but non hard skill, like what kind of direction that you want to take, or in general like career advice. So that also really helps, but that is very far in the process. But initially, like you just have to practice. Like for example, you shouldn't be taught like how to use a pathfinder. You shouldn't be taught like how to keep the stroke consistent. That is like a very 101 lesson, so to speak. So once you have done that, it will eventually get better. If you're practicing almost every day, or if you have something almost if you have something that you are always working on, so that is like absolutely necessary.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I mean, like this has been like quite a wonderful conversation for me. And I've actually kind of run out of questions to ask you. Um,
Oh,
and usually I kind of like end my episodes with like a bunch of rapid fire questions. But before we kind of go to that, do you have anything that you would like to add as like an end note or closing note?
so I would just say, like, because this is the problem that I see in the industry, and I had talked about in Design Up. I did a conference a few months back. The entire talk was around like product illustration now, which essentially meant like giving context of product illustration in India, and also ending the note on like how can this community of product illustration specifically could be better, because a lot of people want to get into it. There is good talent, and there are a lot of opportunities, and I and my fellow product illustrators usually get reached out to for filling those roles in terms of asking referrals, and things like that. But there aren't enough people now in the community, and people those who want to do uh, s- would take a lot of time to get there. So my only thing I would say is like it's a very amazing niche to kind of get into, and it's a very amazing experience to have. It's just going to take a bit of time, but you can really make a difference, and you can really bring a very strong change. So I would definitely say to anybody that keep practicing, and like you will eventually get there if you're really if you're really very passionate about product illustration.
That's amazing, man. Uh, I mean, very, very great words and insightful. I'm just gonna jump into my rapid fire questions. Um,
Oh my god.
so shall we get started?
Yes, yes.
Awesome. So if you had to pick just one, would you pick 2D illustrations or 3D illustrations?
Okay, 2D, 2D.
Okay. Your favorite illustrator?
My Okay, this is very hard. I have two names actually. So I would say Owen Davy and DKNG at the moment.
Okay, awesome. Um, do you have any particular preference on style of illustrations?
Uh, Style, I like flat and very bold colors. Yeah, that would be my style preference.
Okay. Um, one piece of advice that you would probably give your younger self.
Uh, don't listen to anybody else. If you are confident in what you're doing, and if you are also at the same time self-aware of your shortcomings and weaknesses, work on that, and you'll always be rewarded for the work.
That's awesome, man. Um, so I usually ask this question at the end of my episode to almost all my guests, which is like,
Hmm.
if you kind of like literally had to worry about nothing, right? Whether it is career, whether it's money, whether it's job, whatever, what would you be doing right now?
Oh, that's a very good question. So, I am the person who almost uh, never worries. So I'm always like thinking about something or things like that. But if everything is sorted, I think I would still illustrate and make something out of like the time that I have. Even today, like there are a lot of ideas that I keep penning down in my notes. So I would eventually like kind of check them off my bucket list. So I would still be creating, and I still do, like even if it's not for freelance work, that I'm not doing at the moment because of few reasons. So I'm still like creating something. So I think regardless of if I have to worry or not worry, I would still be doing that.
Awesome. Um, I mean, it's as I said, it's been an amazing conversation. I mean, there's so much I learned about product illustration from the conversation I had with you. Um, I mean, just thank you so much, man, for taking the time out and for doing this episode. It's really wonderful to have you here, and it was a great conversation for me.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting. I really hope it was helpful.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Product Stories for more such episodes.